Glasgow, 1857. A young woman from one of the city's most respectable families kept a secret that could destroy her. That secret had a name, a face, and a growing appetite for power over her. And when he was found dead, the trail of poison led straight back to her door. The trial that followed gripped a nation. The letters were scandalous, the evidence was damning, and the woman in the dock never flinched. The jury set her free, but they did not call her innocent. And that distinction has haunted this case for over 160 years. We will lay every clue out before you: the letters, the arsenic, the timeline, the motive. And we will weigh them together, because by the end of this story, you will need to decide for yourself what really happened in that house on Blitheswood Square. Chapter 1. A death nobody expected. Glasgow, March 22nd, 1857. The city had gone quiet hours before Pierre Émile L'Angelier, a 29-year-old clerk from Jersey, returned to his lodgings at Blitheswood Square in visible distress. His landlady, Mrs. Jenkins, found him doubled over in the hallway. He was in severe pain, cramping, retching, struggling to speak. A doctor was summoned, but arrived to find little he could explain. By morning, Pierre Émile L'Angelier was dead. He was a young man with no known illness and no apparent reason to die. The certificate could not honestly state a natural cause. Authorities ordered a post-mortem examination. Consider what the investigators were thinking at this moment. A healthy young man in agony, dead before dawn, with no witness to what he had consumed that night. What the post-mortem would find in Pierre's stomach would change everything, and point this inquiry toward a name no one in polite Glasgow society was yet prepared to say aloud. Let's open the board. The location: Glasgow, Scotland, and Madeleine Smith, the prime suspect. Chapter 2. The two worlds they lived in. Glasgow, 1825. Madeleine Smith was 20 years old, the eldest daughter of a respected architect. Her world was one of dinner parties, piano recitals, and rigid social expectation. Pierre Émile L'Angelier moved in an entirely different Glasgow. He was a French-born clerk, charming, ambitious, and almost entirely without money. By every measure that Victorian Glasgow kept, they should never have met. Yet they had met sometime in 1855, and what followed was conducted in near total secrecy. For nearly 2 years, no servant, no parent, no friend appears to have known. Someone had worked very hard to keep it that way. When investigators finally traced the edges of the relationship, they found a correspondence that ran to hundreds of letters. Consider what that means. Hundreds of letters carried secretly across two social worlds, and not a single person claimed to know. What does that level of concealment tell us about what was at stake? And who stood to lose the most if the secret broke? On the board so far, Madeleine Smith, the prime suspect. Now we pin up Pierre Émile L'Angelier, the victim. Chapter 3. Letters that should never exist. Pierre Émile L'Angelier died on the morning of the 23rd of March, 1857. Before his body was cold, Glasgow police moved to search his lodgings on Franklin Place. Inside a locked box, they found them. Dozens upon dozens of letters. The handwriting belonged to Madeleine Smith, daughter of one of Glasgow's most respected architects. There were nearly 200 letters in total, spanning almost 3 years. They were not the cautious words of a respectable young woman of 1857. They were passionate, reckless, and at times shockingly candid. Confessions that Victorian society would have found scandalous beyond measure. In one letter, Madeleine addressed L'Angelier as her husband. The letters made clear that the two had met in secret, repeatedly, against her family's knowledge. Consider what this discovery meant. L'Angelier had kept every word she ever wrote to him. Think about that for a moment. She would have known those letters were out there, somewhere, and she could not get them back. What would a woman of her position, facing absolute ruin, have been willing to do to make sure those letters were never read? On the board so far, Pierre Émile L'Angelier, the victim. Now we pin up William Minnock, the rival suitor. Chapter 4. The Arsenic in the Chemist's Book. There is a chemist's shop in Glasgow, and inside it, a register. That register is a ledger of danger. Every purchaser of poison required by law to sign their name. Madeleine Smith signed that register herself, not once, but on multiple occasions across the weeks before Pierre L'Angelier died. Each time she purchased arsenic. Her stated reason, a Victorian remedy as fashionable as it was perilous, was to improve her complexion. Arsenic as a cosmetic was not unheard of in 1857. Women across Britain were sold the idea. But consider the timing carefully with me now. L'Angelier fell gravely ill in February 1857, and again in March. Each episode of illness followed a meeting with Madeleine. Was this a young woman pursuing an innocent beauty regimen? Or does the coincidence of dates weigh heavier than that? The jury will ask that question. But first, we must reckon with what the evidence board has not yet shown us. On the board so far, William Minnock, the rival suitor. Now we pin up 1855. Secret affair with L'Angelier begins. Chapter 5. The meetings nobody admitted. The prosecution's witnesses arrived with something Madeleine Smith had not anticipated: corroboration. Neighbors and household servants placed Émile L'Angelier outside the Smith family home on specific nights in February and March 1857. Those were the very nights Madeleine had denied any meeting took place, and those were the very nights L'Angelier later recorded feeling violently, inexplicably ill. The first episode struck him on the 19th of February, leaving him bedridden for 2 days. The second episode came roughly 3 weeks later, after another unacknowledged visit to Blitheswood Square. Each illness arrived within hours of leaving that house. Consider the pattern with me: meeting, illness, recovery, then another meeting. What do you make of that sequence? And what does it suggest about who knew what and when? Madeleine's denials, when finally confronted, shifted. Admission replacing denial. Detail by careful detail. And yet, L'Angelier kept returning to that basement window, night after night, illness after illness. The question that now haunts the board is not merely whether he was poisoned there, but why. knowing what he must have felt, he never stopped coming back. On the board so far, 1855, secret affair with L'Angelier begins. Now we pin up early 1857. Smith engaged to Minnock. Chapter 6. The Suitor and the Silence. In the winter of 1855, a new figure entered Madeleine Smith's life. William Minnock was wealthy, steady, and everything her family desired. Her father approved of Minnock immediately. Meanwhile, Émile L'Angelier still possessed every letter Madeleine had ever written him. By early 1857, Madeleine wrote to L'Angelier, asking him to return those letters and end their relationship. He refused. He kept everyone. Think about what that refusal means. A man holding letters he had every reason to deploy. L'Angelier's own diary. Entries from this period are deeply unsettling. He wrote of grievances, of power, of what he might yet be forced to do. A motive, cold, specific, and entirely his own, had now fully taken shape. What we must ask next is whether that leverage was ever acted upon, and what Madeleine did in response. On the board so far, early 1857, Smith engaged to Minnock. Now we pin up Feb. 1857. Smith purchases arsenic from chemist. Chapter 7. A verdict like no other. Edinburgh, July 1857. The High Court of Justiciary was packed before the doors had fully opened. Madeleine Smith entered the dock composed, almost unnervingly so. The prosecution's case rested on one word: arsenic. Toxicologist Dr. Frederick Penny told the court he had found a lethal quantity of arsenic in Émile L'Angelier's stomach. The defense rose and attacked the science directly, pointing out that arsenic occurred naturally in the environment and could contaminate a body after death. Witness after witness was placed on the stand and then systematically undermined. L'Angelier's own diary, introduced as evidence, suggested he had been ill on days when no meeting with Madeleine could be proven. Think about what that means for a moment. If he was ill before those documented meetings, who administered the first dose, and when? The prosecution could not prove she had handed him anything on any specific night. After 9 days of testimony, the jury retired. They returned with a verdict that exists only in Scots law, not proven. She walked out of that courtroom free, but the verdict declared nothing. It simply refused to decide, and the question it left open has never been closed. On the board so far, Feb. 1857, Smith purchases arsenic from chemist. Now we pin up Mar 1857. L'Angelier dies of arsenic poisoning. Chapter 8. The Theory Against Her. By the spring of 1857, the prosecution had assembled a theory. Madeleine Smith, they argued, was trapped. Pierre L'Angelier held letters that could destroy her reputation and her impending marriage. In February 1857, she purchased arsenic, recorded in the chemist's book under her own name. She purchased arsenic again in March. L'Angelier suffered a violent illness in late February and survived. He suffered a second collapse in mid-March and again survived. On the night of March 22nd, he visited her, and this time He did not recover. The prosecution mapped each collapse against each purchase, and the dates aligned. Look at that alignment with us for a moment. 3 episodes, 3 opportunities, 1 accelerating pattern. Does that shape feel like design, or does it feel like coincidence? The defense had an answer, and it would change everything. On the board so far, Mar 1857, L'Angelier dies of arsenic poisoning. Now we pin up a key clue, intimate letters, 60 plus, recovered. Chapter 9. The theory that unsettles everything. There is a second story buried inside this case. Émile L'Angelier was known, even by his friends, as a man of extreme emotional volatility. He had threatened, more than once, to destroy Madeleine Smith entirely. Those who knew him testified that he spoke openly about ruining her reputation. Arsenic, in small repeated doses, was used across Victorian Scotland as a so-called tonic. The theory holds that L'Angelier may have dosed himself deliberately, intending to implicate Madeleine. Consider what you know of the timeline, and ask yourself whether this version fits just as cleanly. The prosecution never established how arsenic passed from Madeleine's hand into L'Angelier's body. No witness saw the transfer. The defense argued that a man capable of prolonged emotional blackmail was equally capable of a final, calculated act. Both theories, guilt and innocence, mapped perfectly onto the same evidence. The court reached a verdict, but the evidence itself never did. On the board so far, a key clue, intimate letters, 60 plus, recovered. Now we pin up a key clue, arsenic purchases, chemist records. Chapter 10. Your turn. Solve the board. We have arrived at the end of the board. Madeleine Smith, 21 years old, stood accused of poisoning Pierre Émile L'Angelier in Glasgow in 1857. The letters, dozens of them, mapped a secret love affair her family was never meant to know existed. The arsenic register placed her name beside a purchase of the poison on 3 separate occasions. L'Angelier died in the early hours of the 23rd of March, 1857, in severe agony. The post-mortem found enough arsenic in his body to kill several men. The timeline is where this case still refuses to settle. Consider this with me: the nights she admitted meeting him and the nights she did not do not perfectly align with his recorded episodes of illness. The motive existed. A new, respectable engagement threatened everything L'Angelier knew about her, and yet the jury returned a verdict of not proven. Scotland's rare, unsettling third option. Now, I want you to weigh the pieces yourself. The timeline, the purchases, the letters, the motive. What does the evidence taken together suggest to you about what truly happened that night? Leave your theory in the comments below. And one detail buried in those letters that we have not yet spoken aloud changes everything. On the board so far, a key clue, arsenic purchases, chemist records. Now we pin up a key clue, arsenic traces, L'Angelier's stomach,